Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, Final Four edition, and a college basketball national champion to be crowned in just over a few days. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, we talked about college basketball potentially offering up a little bit of parity this March Madness. Lo and behold, 1 blue blood and 3 debutantes vying to cut down the nets in Houston.
Wide open. Yeah, it was a little soft at the top. And there were some good teams in that 30 to 40 range that could make a little bit of noise. And, you know, aside from Connecticut, there's been some fortunes here for a couple of these teams, right? I mean, they've played well, certainly, but it's nice to catch a break or two along the way, and that's what teams like FAU and Miami have done, certainly. But, you know, Connecticut is the cream of the crop here as a team that we thought was substantially better than their 4 seed. We actually had them power rated the second best team coming into the tournament. So no surprise, and it feels like theirs to lose at this point.
Yeah, I mean, they have definitely lived up to some of that advanced billing. And when you look at UConn's full season body of work, started the year like a house on fire, going 14-0, hit a little bit of a lull when they went 2-6 over an 8-game stretch, and have since rebounded to remind everyone why they were so good during November and December. Just to create a little bit of historical precedent here, since seeding began in 1979, this will be the first Final Four without a top 3 seed. It's just the 4th Final Four since 1979 without at least 1 seed, 1980, 2006, in 2011, and this year was the first tournament where no number 1 seeds even advanced to the Elite Eight. So for anybody that has a chance to win their bracket pools with friends, family, and office members, good luck to you this coming weekend. Mine was up in smoke when the Houston Cougars went down in flames. And when you look at the way you will have 3 teams in FAU, Miami, and San Diego State appearing in their first Final Four, the first time in 53 years we've seen that scenario play out. But 2 games to break down. One, the early matchup between 2 teams I don't think anybody anticipated to be here, maybe even members of their own fan bases. Of course, between FAU and San Diego State, you're looking at the Aztecs, a 2-point favorite against the Owls. Total on the game, we'll call it 131.5, more or less the consensus. There are some 132s out there. And Payne, before we get into some of the X's and O's on this game, I guess the first question...
You're such a Vegas guy, by the way. It's hilarious.
Oh, God, you're going to have to expound on this. You can't take shots and go from there.
Chris is like at 132.5. It's 132, 130, like all of the, Buckeye, Chris. Go ahead. 131.5 at Westgate. Where else? Circa. Yeah, there you go. South Point. Okay.
You know what?
Hasn't
Fine.
woken up to take a bet yet.
We'll use the Asian handicap here, and it's 131.75 is what we'll go with to try and make sure we're there.
I'm just busting.
But when you look at this game, if had it been played before the tournament, fair or foul in terms of where this game is being priced after we have 4 additional data points during March Madness for both these sides?
It's a good question. You said something at the top that, yes, FAU and San Diego State have, I wouldn't call them completely fortunate to be here, but you look at these 2 teams, like, you could absolutely see the path, right, to the Sweet 16 for both teams. Like, we were kind of debating, is it FAU or Memphis that's going to upset Purdue? That was one thing that we were talking about.
I'm still pissed off about that.
Right. That was the big debate. And you could see a path to the Elite Eight for FAU before the tournament started, right? And it's like, who are they playing? Like, that winner had all the potential to beat Purdue. And then all of a sudden it's like, what is Tennessee? I look at this, and there's been some good fortune for FAU, but you could have saw the path. But like going back, it's like down 5. You're down with like 5 seconds to go against Memphis. They didn't even have the possession. You're trailing Fairleigh Dickinson by with 9 minutes to go. You're down multiple possessions to Tennessee midway through the second half before you have an ejection to the big man. You're down 7 to Kansas State at the midway point of the second half, even though you're like dominating the glass. And San Diego State, on the other hand, like, they went through Alabama and Creighton. To me, that's like really impressive, even if it hasn't looked great aesthetically, and certainly the call late was atrocious. You don't end a game that way, especially when you've called it completely different throughout against Creighton. But like, they've managed two better teams to play their style. And that was uber impressive to me. We weren't high in the Mountain West, and for good reason. You go back to the opening round show, it's like, we didn't really think much of the conference. We thought FAU got hosed, thought they were easily a top 30 team. So, like, based on how these games have played out, there's not a ton of adjustments for me. Because FAU, we were higher on than market coming into the dance. SDSU, we've moved up over the last two games. And you kind of have Brian Dutcher just proving to be this X factor with extended prep if you looked at some of that data. So, before the tournament, this game was pick'em. Right now, we make SDSU like -1.5. That's kind of your core before you get into any of the matchups or the coaching. And the game market-wise, right? Like market-wise, and we're going to break the game down. At pick, you're going to get some San Diego State money. We saw that even at 1. If this gets to 3, like, there likely seems to be some value there at FAU before you start like factoring in some of the other components to this game.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great place to go when you look at how you try and break down this game from an X's and O's standpoint. FAU, top 30 in the country on both the offensive and deficiency side. Adjusted tempo, nothing to write home about. Kind of in the middle of the pack, slightly above average in that regard. And when we look at Florida Atlantic, 37% of FAU's points have come from three-pointers, highest of any team that reached the Sweet 16 and the fourth highest amongst all tournament teams. FAU on the season shoots roughly 37% from beyond the arc. They haven't come anywhere close to that so far, but you mentioned rebounding, and that was where they were able to exploit Kansas State's deficiencies, despite turning the ball over 22 times in a game, which was the most by any team in the tournament thus far, 4 more than some of the other competition had done, with 18 being the high in March Madness. Enter San Diego State, a team that people made a case for as a live underdog against Alabama because how good they are when it comes to defending the perimeter. We know they can struggle to throw the ball in the ocean for extended stretches. That's why they're a fringe top 100 team in offensive efficiency, but they're deep, they're athletic, and they're holding teams to less than 20% from beyond the arc of this tournament. I don't ever like to oversimplify the handicap, but is it as straightforward as, hey, if FAU makes threes, they're going to have enough separation against San Diego State, and if the Aztecs continue to get some of that three-point variance and defend, they have a very straightforward path to getting to the first national championship.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple areas here within the game that, you know, can certainly tilt it where teams have some advantages. I think, you know, the mindset and the idea is that, oh my God, FAU is able to beat Tennessee, a team that defends the three very well. Metrically, like, yeah, number 1 in the country, but when you look at like open shot rate stuff, and something that Slay even said, they had some trouble defensively with some 4-out, some 5-out stuff where they allowed open jumpers. And we talked multiple times about the SEC just being a horrific three-point shooting conference. So, you know, there was some flaws in the numbers metrically for Tennessee defensively on the perimeter. You look at what FAU does offensively. Like, Dusty May's done a very good job being analytically savvy, right? They're taking threes or near proximity shots. That's just what they do. 26th in three-point attempts per 100 possessions. Nearly 44% of FAU's shots are threes. San Diego State has done a fantastic job defending threes. Number 1 in the country in three-point defense versus an average opponent. Second in overall three-point defensive efficiency. And it's not just like, hey, the shots aren't falling. It's like the one team in the Mountain West that successfully guards the perimeter. And you look so far in the tournament, San Diego State's holding opponents to 17% from 3. Now, that number isn't sustainable, no matter how good you are defending from deep. But the way they contest shots, the way they close out, the way they force you off that three-point line, all help that, you know. FAU does like to get out in transition. 19% of their possessions are pushing the ball, top 45 rate in the country, but San Diego State does a fantastic job getting back on defense. When you look at some of the half-court stuff, FAU wants to space the floor. Typically, they'll play 4-out with a big, either Golden or Rosado, Golden, probably has a little bit more of a difficult time in this game, against Mesa. We saw Cockbrenner really struggle in terms of like efficiency. But FAU, lots of motion, lots of misdirection, lots of pick and roll. Both kind of set up a ton of these catch and shoot situations. You look, more than 34% of FAU shots are catch and shoot. You look metrically, John L. Davis, Martin Forrest, Greenlee, Boyd, they all need to be attacking with the dribble drive off pick and roll. That's kind of the one area where San Diego State has been a little bit vulnerable outside the top 240 defending pick and roll. But if FAU is looking to pass off pick and roll, San Diego State just becomes one of the very best defenses in catch and shoot situations. Top 10 in contested rate on jump shots, which I mentioned. So that's kind of the interesting give and take here. There'll be this cat and mouse element too. Like, does Mesa play when only Golden's on the court for FAU, or is Mesa forced to play more minutes in this spot? For as guard-oriented as FAU is, they're top 15 in near proximity shots. Very good offensive rebounding team. That's where they absolutely crushed Kansas State in the last game. Top 30 in points per putback possession. So, when Mensa's off the floor, San Diego State can struggle defending the rim in the half court at times. They're barely inside the top 200 in points per rim shot in that setting. So some things to think about there where Mensa may have to play a little bit more than expected. And so sometimes, like, if he's on the court, now all of a sudden, like, your 4 and 5 man for San Diego State isn't necessarily a threat to score. And so that becomes this interesting matchup here. I think, San Diego State on the other end, it's the worst remaining offense left in the tournament, right? And that's what was so impressive to me is, you beat Alabama and Creighton, like 2 of our top 11 teams, and you get them to play your style. And Matt Bradley is just totally no-showing. 8 points combined in those 2 wins, But even with Bradley struggling, like, in SDSU, like, not being a great offense, they've just managed to play these games at their pace. And if you can play a game at your pace against Alabama and Creighton, like, you have to project that this has the ability to play at their pace against FAU more times than not. It's really that simple, right? And, FAU allows you to take a bunch of mid-range shots. Again, they're just very analytically sound. They're 344th in the country in mid-range shots allowed per 100 possessions. San Diego State likes taking those, right? They're 41st in that mid-range attempt rate. So you need Bradley to start knocking down some mid-range stuff. This is also a game where, San Diego State has to attack the man in front, whether it's Bradley, Trammell, who... It's interesting because you think about San Diego State's offense, it's like very much just everyone touches it, but the usage rate for Trammell's gone up. Dutcher's kind of understood that, hey, we just kind of need to get our key guys the ball, let them make plays, and Trammell's done that here. So Trammell has to be willing to attack his man on one-on-one situations. FAU's actually outside the top 300 in points per ISO possession. FAU switches a lot defensively, and you look at Tennessee, just going back to that matchup, because I think a lot of people will compare it. Tennessee doesn't really have a shot creator or like a go-get-a-bucket guy. Yep. And, Kansas State had one in Noel. He had 30 and 12. You go back to the earlier round game against Fairleigh Dickinson, like Demetri Roberts had success being that guy that could create in those ISO situations one-on-one. So if San Diego State's hitting the mid-range jumpers, which they like to take, and Trammell is, willing to attack in dribble drive situations, maybe this SDSU offense doesn't get bogged down as much, and there aren't those like long spurts where they're having droughts.
I mean, you mentioned Trammell, and I think it's fascinating knowing he's the team's second leading scorer, scored 46 points over the last 3 games as Matt Bradley has really struggled to get his jumper going, so much so that Brian Dutcher has cut down on his minutes. I mean, Bradley's only been out there 39 total minutes in the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games against Alabama and Creighton, and it's the first time all season Trammell has scored in double digits 3 times in a row, highlighted by the 21-point outburst in the Sweet 16 against Alabama. So it definitely appears to be all hands on deck for San Diego State. Dutcher has made some of those adjustments on the fly, and for all the futility as it pertains to this Aztecs program and what they haven't been able to achieve in the month of March, this is also the highest seed that they've been in the Big Dance going back to 2014. They're reaping the benefits, and when you look at where they rank in terms of program proficiency since 2009, 2010. I mean, San Diego State tied with Arizona for the 5th most wins of any D1 program. So they have been the model of consistency. They're just now starting to scratch the surface on a deep run in March. Meanwhile, Florida Atlantic, look, there's nothing we can say to disparage what they've been able to accomplish all year. It's an extremely deep team, and I can't see Dusty May switching away from what has been so successful for this team all year, where they're 15th in bench minutes and 9 different players are averaging 13 plus minutes so far in this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, FAU is just, they feel like the most locked in team, right? Just very cohesive. They're willing to play for one another. But, again, there's spots in this tournament where, probably pretty fortunate to beat Memphis. Why are you trailing late to Fairleigh Dickinson? Why are you trailing, in the second half to Tennessee? Like they've made all of these comebacks, but you think about these games and, how they play out, and you kind of liken it to football. Like sometimes a 7-point win isn't a 7-point win once you dig a little bit deeper. I really think, when you look at San Diego State, one of the most impressive things to me this tournament is you get out on Alabama and Miller's in foul trouble and everything is picture perfect. You couldn't have drawn it up any better, and you're competing, and then all of a sudden Alabama comes and rips your freaking guts out and you're down 8. How are you going to respond? That was like the most interesting segment of basketball I've seen this term. Is somehow San Diego State calls that timeout. They're down like 8 or 9, and you're thinking like, Alabama's taking control. Even if you bet San Diego State at that point, you're thinking to myself, man, Bama just got us. They're the better team. And they come out of that timeout, and San Diego State just has another gear. And that was uber impressive to me, something that I just hadn't seen from a Mountain West team. And this is going to be, a really interesting matchup. Early money to this point, I've seen, some of the accounts we have, like San Diego State. But again, like that was at money line at better prices. That was, laying some 1. I think, if this were to somehow get to 3, it potentially becomes intriguing just for, the pure math guys taking and grabbing numbers.
Hey, I mean, you mentioned that comeback against Alabama when they got themselves behind the 8 ball. It almost felt like a boxing equivalent of a standing 8 count. They tasted their own blood. They had a secondary pitch that allowed them to get back into it. And there were stretches against Creighton in the Elite 8 game where you just felt that the Jays were 1 made 3 away from stretching that lead out. San Diego State didn't allow that to happen. And here we are with them 1 game away, FAU as well, from playing for a national championship. Switching gears to the nightcap, when you're looking at UConn and Miami, UConn a 5.5-point favorite. I'm checking both here in town and offshore, and I'm going to call 5.5 the consensus.
That is absolutely.
You can correct me if I'm wrong. At 149.5, or do you want to go with 150 here? I just want to make sure that we can check our boxes.
150 is the right number. I mean, Chris is 150.5.
Okay, so we'll go with 150 then. We'll split the difference here. UConn trying to be the 6th school to win its 5th national title in program history would also actually have the most losses for a national champion since their 2014 team under Kevin Ollie was able to cut down the nets. And we talked about it at the top of the show. It's been a tale of 3 seasons for the Huskies, 14-0 out of the gates, 2-6 over the next 8 games, and since have gone 11-2 in their last 13. Their road to Houston included wins against Iona, St. Mary's, Arkansas, and Gonzaga. Meanwhile, on the other side for Miami, and you mentioned all 7-point wins aren't created equally, Miami has been the definition of survive and advance, and they deserve full marks for the way the guards have raised their level of play during crunch time, and it's part of the reason Miami this year has gone 9-2 against the number as an underdog, 7-4 straight up in that role, and they've had the most difficult road to Houston, basically going against all the best seeds in their region. Come back against Drake late. They knock off Indiana as a 1.5-point dog, upset Houston as a 7.5-point pup, and then pull off the outright upset against Texas in a game that was in that 4.5-5 range, went off closer to that soft 3.5 range. Payne, Miami doesn't fit the profile of a national champion by any stretch. They're elite offensively, and they're a little bit careless when it comes to the defensive end. UConn, who you talked about, power rated amongst some of the best in the country and have exceeded expectations, so much so that they've blown out all 4 opponents in their path and have a plus 67 point differential. In this game, before we get into some of the X's and O's, when we look at the 2 head coaches, do you feel either Danny Hurley on one side or Jim Larrañaga has a massive edge over his counterpart?
Massive, I don't know. Certainly Hurley's, built the Rhode Island program up, and, he's kind of rejuvenated a Connecticut program, and here he is in the Final Four. Like, he doesn't get the credit necessarily for being the X's and O's guy or the guy that's making fantastic in-game adjustments. That's very much Jim Larrañaga. I think what you said at the top was probably the most interesting point. Is Larrañaga's really been good as a dog in these tournaments. He's really been good, obviously, with Miami, and you really can't question the road that they've overcome here. But there are some interesting elements to that. You know, it's like Miami's outscored its problems. I think that's the best way to put this, right? There isn't, to your point, like a track record for teams outside the top 100 in offense or defense that make runs like this. But if you're scoring 85 and 89 and 88, it doesn't really matter that your defense is outside the top 100. And then you just, combine the great guard play that's going on from Wong and Pack, right? It's the 7-figure backcourt. And then you have Jordan Miller's efficiency.
That sounds a little bitter over there with the 7-figure backcourt.
Well, I mean, Pack's on a 2-year, $800K deal.
Oh, not a bad gig if you can get it. I'm not going to lie.
Right. I mean, especially he only plays one end of the court. But, you have Jordan Miller, who probably is the best draft prospect among the team, and then Omier playing substantially bigger than 6'6", 6'7", and then you have the brilliance of Jim Larrañaga, and so Miami's tough to beat. And you just kind of go back to a game that certainly impacted us. It's like Larrañaga was able to camo the deficiency against Houston. We all thought Houston would be able to kill on the glass, and that was a game, right? Like, even professional bettors, like, we felt like we were in a good spot with our future, and shit, like, pro bettors are taking that game from 6.5 out to 8. And it's like, all of a sudden, like, anytime Houston crashed the glass, Larrañaga made sure Miami tried getting an easy bucket, and they did. The run Miami made in that first half was basically a rebound, long pass, and an easy layup in transition 3 or 4 times in a row, and just catching Houston crashing the glass, and eventually that forced Houston to stop crashing the glass, and it took an element of their offense away. But you just kind of look at Miami's tournament as a whole, right? Not of a ton of adjustment to their power rating for me, and I think that'll probably sound crazy to some, but we were a touch higher on Miami coming in. Great guards, great coach. The Omier injury we had heard was a little bit bigger of a problem than it's shown to be, was limping around at times there against Texas. But again, like, we said it, right? A 7-point win on the scoreboard isn't always a 7-point win. You kind of have to factor in the game flow. And so, trailing Drake for 37 minutes matters. And, I understand all of, like, the cliche stuff, right? Never give up and, like,
survive in advance, baby. It's right. March. Survive in advance,
right? But, like, I value being down by 12 to Texas with 10 minutes to go, and the Longhorns are without Dylan Dessou, more than the late game comeback, right? And if you, like, watch these games close enough, the big turning point in the Texas game was that loose ball foul with 11 minutes to go. Omier completely wipes out Marcus Carr and, injures Carr's leg to the point where Carr had to play off the ball and hide in the corner as a spot-up shooter for, the next few minutes to try and walk off that injury. And then finally Rodney Terry's like, I got to go down with the captain of the ship here. He puts Carr, back in control of the offense 3-4 minutes later, but post-injury, Carr made one shot the final 11 minutes. Couldn't get by anybody after the leg injury. So, like, ratings-wise, haven't moved Miami up a ton, even though they just cover these numbers as a dog, to your point. UConn, certainly playing peak basketball. We know they're long, athletic. They've defended all year. The shots are falling now, and they've played some tough defenses. Ideally, you're saying to yourself, like, UConn has to be at their peak market price. And, kind of going back to the top, like, we had UConn rated number 2 coming into the tournament. Bartovic has had them number 1 since February 1st. And so, like, it feels like mindset-wise, Connecticut's at their peak price. But then I asked myself, it's like, we took Miami +5, -15 versus Texas. Is UConn really 0.8 against Texas without Dylan Dessou? Like, no. The answer is hell no. So, like, maybe UConn isn't wildly priced here, but I think the coaching advantage to your main question certainly goes Larrañaga's way here.
Hey, look, I mean, Miami makes shots. Obviously, this isn't going to be a rocket science handicap. They're a very difficult out, and that's what they've done through the first 4 games.
They make
of the
tough
tournament.
shots, too.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like these are wide open jumpers they're knocking down. I mean, anytime a player this deep in the tournament puts together a performance like Jordan Miller did, where he was perfect from the floor, from the foul line, scoring 27 points, it's a little bit of a scary proposition. You look at UConn and their big 3, if we we even want to call it that. I mean, obviously Adama Sanogo is an absolute load in the middle. We'll see what kind of minutes he logs there, as Danny Hurley's been liberal with some of his rotations. I mean, the guy's been unstoppable. Most utilized offensive weapon. He's taking a shot on nearly 30% of their possessions when he's out there on the floor. But Jordan Hawkins shooting extremely well from deep. Andre Jackson out there stuffing the stat sheet. And I think it's so fascinating when you look at some of the metrics, because UConn does check the boxes of what we've seen from a traditional national champion. Top 3 in offensive efficiency, top 15 in defensive efficiency. They've made 41 threes this tournament, 7 more than any other team. So for all the accolades we give Miami and how well they're shooting the ball, UConn is knocking down those open jumpers. If they continue to fall, they lock you down defensively. There is a path for them to cover this number. But again, we're seeing 5.5 pretty much painted. And the one interesting thing about this game, it's been great two-way action from the handful of books I've spoken to early on this week.
Yeah, I mean, you have the team that just constantly covers with the great coach, and you have the storyline of, taking George Mason here years and years ago, and, Connecticut's like, it's a basketball program, but it is 5.5, starting to trend at the sharper shops a little bit up, right? Like, I mean, Heritage is using a 6 right now. Chris is shaded towards the favorite here. Matchup-wise, like, Miami does a really good job getting out. About 19% of their possessions are in transition. They're top 5 in scoring efficiency when they push. UConn does a good job getting back for a team that likes to crash the glass on offense. So maybe, if Omir's in there and he's able to get those rebounds, there's going to be some outlet stuff. But that's something to look for. In the half court, UConn wants to close out. They want to push you off the three-point line. They're top 15 defending catch-and-shoot situations. UConn contests shots extremely well, force you to dribble drive, which, is good. Like, you can't go under screens on a guy like Pack, right? Force him to dribble and shoot into length and size in the mid-range game or at the rim because he's just so undersized. Wong, same thing. You want him to dribble the ball multiple times. And you wonder if that's where UConn's athleticism and their length and their size start to present some issues. Now, sometimes UConn can be overly aggressive defensively. They can be very handsy. They like to hedge pick and roll and screens and then scramble to recover and force you to shoot over guys like Sanogo and Klingon. So you got to stay out of foul trouble. You got to keep Miami off the line. Defensively, Miami's played a little bit better, I guess. I mean, in the half court, they haven't. They want to be able to pressure UConn, but it's got to be in spurts, right? I think Larrañaga does it in specific spots because Miami can't do it for a full 40. They only want to play about 5.5 guys. That's all they trust. And, UConn's offense, to your point, trending substantially better than their full season metrics. Guard play has really trended up the last, month plus. You see Hawkins and Jackson, they've come on as well late. I know UConn's, shot the lights out. I believe they're shooting like 43% in this tournament from deep. Shooting environment in Houston will be a little bit of a change. But UConn's done a really nice job creating open looks for guys off the pick and roll. Top 50 on the season, top 20 down the stretch. Again, trending well. Miami's outside the top 260 defending catch and shoot jumpers in the half court. So, the closeout stuff hasn't been great. If you look in 2 of the 4 games this tournament alone, Miami's allowed double-digit three-point attempts to be tracked as wide open. So if they're not contesting shots, UConn's going to continue probably the torrid shooting. The size on the inside could be a problem, obviously, whether it's Sanogo or Klingon, even Jackson, who probably will play more in this game due to his athleticism, trying to contain Miller on the other end of the court. UConn, top 40 offense scoring from the post. Miami, outside the top 340 in points per post-up possession allowed. Miami does a horrific job defending the rim as well, outside the top 300 in points per shot at the rim in the half court. UConn, top 10 in near proximity shot percentage. You just wonder, right? The physicality UConn plays with isn't really what you see in the ACC. You do wonder if Miami eventually starts to wear down. The 5 most important fouls in this game are Omir's.
Yep.
If he's in foul trouble, the game's over at that point. There really isn't another option down low for Miami,
It's just pretty wild. I mean, when you look at the dynamics and how college basketball changes overall, that this is the team that won the ACC regular season. Here they were coming in as a 5 seed, essentially into the big dance, a little bit undersold, and you can make the case that they're playing their best ball, but still defense optional for extended stretches, and eventually that Achilles heel could catch up to the Canes. You mentioned the shooting background, and I probably should have addressed that at the top. Obviously, it doesn't pertain to just this game. We hear this storyline and this narrative all the time. Teams go from basketball arenas into cavernous venues like they're going to play in at NRG Stadium. Do you make an adjustment for that? Is it just something that makes for good hot take discussion, or is it a very real component that if we're talking about it not being a sellout crowd, that it could take these teams a little while to adjust to unfamiliar surroundings?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a one-game setting, so you're going to have some variance. So anytime, the shots aren't falling, suddenly it's the backdrop. You look in some of these situations in the Final Four, there's been some scoring upticks relative to market. So sometimes there's that over-adjustment in the market because of it. I don't know what the new ball in conjunction with the backdrop looks like. To your point, the tickets have become really, really affordable if you wanted to go to the Final Four just based upon who's in it.
They may start paying people to show up at the games the way things are trending right now.
We couldn't get you to go.
Sometimes Payne, you have some responsibilities on the home front you have to attend to.
There's no responsibilities. Put the dog, let the brother-in-law do it, and we'll head out on the road.
Hey, you did come with the aggressive sales pitch on Sunday for one of our buddies as well, who is a diehard UConn fan, who I honestly think you're wearing down little by little, who may end up taking you up on that offer for a Monday night national championship if his beloved Huskies do make the finals.
The third party is only not attending because and me as well, we feel bad that you're not going. That's why this hasn't.
I gave you guys my full blessing. You guys have carte blanche. Two grown adult individuals that don't need me to be 3 as a crowd to try and get out there. You two can go gallivanting through the streets of Houston, and you can pay your $12 to sit courtside come Monday night.
We did try to convince you, and you gave us the corporate PC Todd response initially, and then you went dark, and then you came back. You're like, I told you I wasn't going to go. There was no I told you weren't going to go immediately.
You dance between the raindrops a little bit here and there. And if you want to send me the Payne Insider private jet, pick me up right before the game, get me down in time, watch the contest, and I can be back on the tarmac right after they play One Shining Moment on CBS, I'm good to go. But these are the kind of arrangements I need to make these spontaneous travel decisions for sporting events.
Unaware of those arrangements.
All right. Well, we'll see. I'm still awaiting the full corporate proposal from the Bet the Board home offices about college football kickoff 2024. You can follow
Ireland. Yes.
You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And while this may be the final installment of our trilogy for college basketball, still plenty of great content around the Bet the Board home offices. If you find yourself interested in the sports trading card space, Payne does an outstanding job with minority owner of PWCC Marketplace, Jesse Craig. Encourage you to check those out. The best part about all of those podcasts is they're evergreen, so a lot of great information for card collectors of all ability levels. And if you're looking for a way to invest each week until football season kicks off, Chris Wormy and I host the Stay Green podcast that typically drops Thursday afternoons or Fridays to make you a few dollars at the track during the dog days of summer, should you not want to embark on the baseball grind. But Payne, as always, is tradition around these parts. One final order of business to transact before we put a bow on the college basketball sprint. Have you identified a wagering opportunity for all of our loyal Bet the Board listeners?
I wouldn't call it nearly on par with Texas -4 over Xavier, and candidly, you're not going to be able to get as much down in the team total market. But tiny edge showing for us here on the FAU team total under 65. I just go back to what we talked about at the top, and again, it'll be time-stamped if you want to listen to that breakdown a little bit more in depth than just me kind of glossing over some points here. You like San Diego State's ability to get the game at their pace, and it's not like FAU's like an absolute jet up and down the court. But we've seen San Diego State be able to, slow down Charleston, who is like a top 30 offense in terms of pace. You play Furman to a 52. Alabama, who's an offense that wants to get up and down, held to 64. Even Creighton, an offense and a team that we thought was wildly undervalued coming into the dance, and they were able to, kind of keep those guards at bay, keep the big man Cockburner at bay. And so you like what San Diego State's capabilities are here from a pace perspective. Even in the Tennessee win, FAU didn't succeed this number. So, you just start to look at some of the matchups. And again, like if FAU's just, hitting a toward, rate from 3, you're going to be in trouble here. But the way that San Diego State defends that perimeter forces you off the 3-point line and takes some tough shots. I think the way Mesa defends, in the paint can give Golden some trouble as well. I just like this game to be played at a slower pace here, more of San Diego State's pace. I think the physicality for San Diego State is interesting here, and potentially, we saw FAU play big, right, against a team like Kansas State. We saw them go toe-to-toe with the Vols, who do play a little bit more physical but allow some open shots from 3. They started to fall in the second half. They had those same open shots in the first half. Then all of a sudden, FAU is able to manage some points there when the ejection happens to Tennessee's big man. We just show some value in this number going FAU team total under 65 here. And that's kind of what we'll end up betting here in this game. But not a ton value-wise for us right here. And again, not as large a play as Texas -4 against Xavier that we gave out on the last show.
Always a little bit tough. Obviously, 2 games remaining in the big tournament. We weren't going to deep dive the NIT final for those folks that are listening Thursday before.
I mean, the numbers are sharp, right?
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
Been a ton of movement in the market on these games, okay? Like, San Diego State consensus opens 1.5. We're out to 2. Certainly 2 is a key number. Like, UConn and Miami really hasn't moved a ton. Like, there just hasn't been a ton of movement. Like, it's if you put up a shoddy number after like 40 data points for each team, right? Like 80 total data points, like, you're probably not going to be in business very long as a sports book.
Well, you may not want to cast aspersions at folks that open Gonzaga and UConn to pick them in the Elite 8 to watch that game.
Can I, you know what? That, you're going to send me into a little bit of a tizzy here, but that...
Oh, we could use a Payne rant before we close up shop. So, I mean, if you're tepid on the best bet and it's a small edge, then let's finish on a high note with a Payne rant before we officially close the book on college basketball.
So you attended those games.
I did.
Okay. And, you watch UCLA Gonzaga. If that game plays out like 100 times over and UCLA is actually healthy, they blow the doors off Gonzaga, right? Like
Correct.
First half, like you're up 13, okay, against Gonzaga. And then all of a sudden, like you come out of the break, Gonzaga, yes, does play a little bit better defense in the second half to start. But like Campbell and Bailey and Jaime Jaquez are just gassed, right? I mean, they're playing like 38, 39, 40 minutes, right? Just absolutely gassed. And then all of a sudden, like Gonzaga takes the lead. But as soon as that 7-minute mark comes, where a slew of timeouts come, you all of a sudden see like Jaquez and Campbell able to like attack the rim at the rates they were doing in the first half, and all of a sudden like it's a game again, and UCLA takes the lead. And listen, I feel great for Julian Strother, who's the Henderson, Nevada product, hitting a big shot like that from like 38 feet from the paint. And you listen to Mark Few after the game, it's like, we practiced that. Awesome, Mark. Like, it's a 1-point game. You're in the double bonus, and Drew Timmy's got 38 going up against a backup center. Mazel.
Shoot it from the parking lot, baby. If you can shoot it from the parking lot with 7 seconds to go, you want to hoist that high percentage jumper.
And so I stayed up late that night. I believe that game ended like 1 a.m.
It was late
East
for
Coast
me out
time.
here on the West Coast.
Yeah. Just because I was like, this is going to be my biggest bet of the tournament. And so fortunately, we were able to get some good bets down offshore, local accounts like -1. But the big shop out there, out west, I won't name, opens pick. Usually 10-dime limits. Got the Red Death box. Only allowed 3 on that game. So very... very upset about that.
I figured
I'm
you'd
going
had
to
your
contain myself because I'm quite. We were pissed.
I figured you'd have had your army of runners on the ground sitting, waiting to swarm the counter.
No. That was like that line lasted like 19 seconds. Like it was just pick was not there very long. We were able to take the second number 2, but just that for the one we talk about this all the time, and we won't have time to do that podcast this year. But the market is a changing, and it's changing for the worse. And it's only going to continue to get worse.
Maybe we'll have to launch that in conjunction with our NFL draft / recap show. There
you go.
Get a little 15-minute rant about the current state of affairs industry-wide, but different discussion for a different day. I think a lot of our listeners understand where we're coming from and appreciate all the comments, feedback, and interactions we get from all of them. So best of luck with 2 meaningful games on Saturday and, of course, the national championship on Monday with wherever your investments take you. And with an FAU team total under ticket in hand on Saturday, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.